corruption in boxing here. We're going to talk a little bit about 2017 Fighter of the Year. And it comes on the back end of ESPN announcing that Terence Bud Crawford is their recipient for the best fighter of 2017. I always find it just a little bit disrespectful that major prominent organizations, especially those in the US, networks and television networks and magazines, publications, journalists, don't take into account the fight cards which are taking place around the world, especially those in Japan on New Year's Eve, which feature up to 6 champions over 2 dates, and I think it just reinforces the racism that I feel is still prevalent within the sport, but also the lack of disrespect towards the lower category fighters. I just think somebody needs to remind ESPN and others that Japan currently has a stronghold in the lower weight categories, especially from minimum weight to flyweight. Japan can currently boast to have more world champions than any other nations, especially Mexico, United States, even the UK, which has had a fantastic year. At one point, having up to sort of 12 champions across all the weight divisions. So the purpose of this particular video is just to have a little critique on their choice in terms of Terence Crawford, and perhaps try and widen the landscape. Try and give a sort of an unbiased perception of, because boxing has 17 weight categories, and sadly the endeavours of some champions, certainly those from the lower weight categories, have not really been recognised. So I'm going to try and throw in a few other names as well. So not to invoke any debate, but just to open a few eyes and just to give a more of a balanced reflection. So Terence Bud Crawford became a male undisputed champion this year. We know that Cecilia Brakas currently holds all of the belts, so it's not boxing's only undisputed champion. But Terence achieved these honours and became the first man to hold all of the major sanctioning titles, including the Ring Magazine and the Lineal Championship, and you can throw in the IBO Championship as well. So 7 belts for the first time in 15 years. So and that's an astounding achievement. Very, very difficult to criticise a fighter attaining that status. We're all hypercritical of boxing these days, that there's not enough unification. So when it happens, we've got to appreciate it. But let's take into context, that there are 17 weight categories, and there are 71 belts in circulation, which is quite a strange sort of equation. Sadly, boxing is in the era of a prospect champion. So having a belt, it doesn't automatically warrant any respect. It's all about the resume, not the record. So we're going to try and have a look at Terence's victims this year, just to try and gauge the veracity of his achievements. So Terence embarked on his historic year back in May, when he defeated Felix Diaz from the Dominican Republic, a former amateur standout and 2008 Olympic gold medalist at the Beijing Summer Olympics. Diaz having defeated, the 2004 defending champion in the final, to achieve gold at the light welterweight weight category. Terence won the bout when Diaz retired on his stool at the end of the 10th round. A very impressive victory. The first fighter to stop Diaz. Let's explore Felix Diaz a little bit more. Now, Felix Diaz had actually come down in weight to fight Terence Crawford at 140 pounds. In fact, it was the first time Felix Diaz had fought at the super lightweight limit of 140 pounds since November of 2014, which was his first major professional step up against Adrian Granados. And that was a 10-round bout. And Felix Diaz got the decision over Granados in a very close and some would argue a controversial fight. I recall Granados being extremely vocal after the fight. He clearly felt he'd won the fight, and there was a sizable contingency in the crowd. There was boos. The crowd was certainly expressing their dismay on the decision. I felt Granados was the better boxer. He dealt with the aggressive smaller southpaw in Diaz, and I felt he was the better fighter on the night. Now, Diaz previously had fought at back in April of 2015, the fight against Gabriel Brasiero. Diaz once again winning a unanimous decision over 10 rounds, but that fight was at a catch weight of 142 pounds. So, coming down in weight to fight, Crawford, I think it slightly taints that victory. Diaz has not made that transition from amateur to professionally in the manner that he'd quite hoped. He's not won a world title yet. Had a good outing against a two-weight champion, Lamont Peterson, in a fight that many felt he'd won. I certainly felt he was the better fighter, but it was a very, very close decision. But he's had a very up and down career, and who knows what the future holds for him. But nevertheless, a very, very impressive victory for Crawford, who systematically broke him down at Madison Square Garden. Okay, from there, Crawford took his two unified titles, and he fought back in August, on the 19th of August, in Lincoln, Nebraska, having moved to the bigger stadium in his home state, in a historic unification against undefeated Namibian IBF and IBO and WBA Super 140-pound champion Julius Indongo. Terence Crawford winning the bout, destroying Julius Indongo. The fight being stopped in 1 minute 38 of round 3. Crawford knocking out Indongo with a fantastic body punch, right hand short body punch that just decapitated his opponent, having floored him previously. It was just a complete discrepancy of skill set. Crawford just the far superior fighter. Julius Indongo, who had in 2017 had just come from complete obscurity, was the recipient of a carefully of a carefully sort of almost a cherry picking like from Edward Trojanowski and his promoters when Julius Ndonga went to Russia to challenge Edward for his IBF and IBO belts. Julius Ndonga knocking out Edward Trojanowski, inflicting his first defeat with a sensational overhand left, bang on the chin. That's all she wrote. Trojanowski came out, he clearly had no ideas how to fight a southpaw, supremely overconfident. It was expected just to be a showcase fight, but it backfired. Now, looking at that victory, Julius Ndonga hadn't previously, he's not a knockout artist. The fights which he's had in Namibia and South Africa, a lot of them have been by points decision, so he's doesn't really have a reputation for being a puncher. So you would argue it's just was it an aberration, a freak occurrence? We didn't really know too much about Julius prior to that. One notable person on his resume was Kaiser Mabuzo, but at the time he was he was at the end of his career. Kaiser had previously fought in Zab Judah, but that was about the only notable fighter on his resume. So Ndonga, credit to him, he went over there, was expected to lose, inflicted a shock, savage defeat, arguably a the knockout of the year as well. And from there, Julius Ndonga didn't rest on his laurels, didn't have any celebratory fight back in Namibia or South Africa. You couldn't have argued if he had done that, because how much of his family would have travelled over to Russia? I guess it was just his team. But he travelled to Glasgow, Scotland, and in a unification, he took on freeweight champion Ricky Burns, who had won the WBA Super 140-pound title, defeating Michele De Rocco for the vacant belt. Michele De Rocco, the Italian, a paper champion, had a good record, but absolutely no challenges of any worth on his resume. Ricky, bookie's favourite, outboxed and stopped De Rocco. But up against Ndonga, Burns, who had previously been a super featherweight and lightweight world champion, may have been the favourite in Scotland, but the critics, and certainly the wider perception, was that Ndonga, the fresher man, undefeated fighter, up against a fighter, at the tail end of his career, and that's the way it worked out. Ndonga systematically outboxed Burns, taking advantage of his height and reach. I think it was a shutout on maybe two of the cards, or one of the cards, I don't recall. But most of the wider consensus was that Julius Ndonga, pretty much won every round and became a unified champion. Terrific achievement, can't argue against it. Burns was tough. He's always had a very good chin, but was a shot fighter, and the sort of indication is after, in his very next fight, he lost against Anthony Crolla as well, a former world champion, in their Battle of England against Scotland. Ricky Burns really needs to hang up the gloves now. So Julius Ndonga took those two victories, knocking out a guy in the first round, didn't really know too much about him, and beating a shot Ricky Burns. Did that portray him to be a better fighter than what we all had expected? I think so. Julius hasn't returned to the ring since his defeat against Crawford. So very, very hard to gauge. So so in conclusion, I think Crawford certainly is a worthy recipient. He is an undisputed champion. He dismantled his opponents. It's just a pity that the 140-pound division is not as deep as it will probably be in about a year's time, with the rise of tremendous young prospects, stroke contenders in Regis Prograis, Josh Taylor, Jose Ramirez, Amir Imam, Ryan Garcia, Jack Catterall. But you can't blame Crawford for the state of the division. He did his job. He won all the belts. He's vacated immediately, and he's moved up to 147 pounds. So, yeah. Now let's take a look at some of the other worthy contenders to that illustrious list. Now, some may be controversial, but we've got other guys like Kenshiro from Japan, the incumbent WBC World Minimum Weight Champion. He's had a wonderful 2017. Due to have his third fight on the New Year's Eve card, but he's already defeated former WBC World Minimum Weight Champions in Ganigan Lopez and Pedro Guevara. Both of them by split decision, very, very close fights. And he's due to take on Gabriel Pedroso, on the 30th in Japan as well. So a fantastic year for Kenshiro. Jared Hurd, the American, 154-pound IBF champion, has had a fantastic year. People may be highly critical of his style. Some had even felt that he was the weakest, certainly the weakest champion at 154 pounds, but one of the weakest champions in boxing. But he stopped two fighters, stopping Tony Harrison for the vacant belt, and then he became the first man to stop Austin Trout. Hugely impressive victory. Came through adversity in both fights, was being outboxed. The level of bravery that he exemplifies, it certainly warrants praise. May rely on his size, attritional, his strength to get through, as he's an extremely big 154 pound fighter, but he is talented. He can fight on the inside. So two very, very good scalps. And one could argue, Tony Harrison and Jared and Austin Trout, maybe better opponents than Felix Diaz and Julius Indongo. So, and also got to give a shout out to Badu Jack as well. This is all about anti-corruption, anti-robbery. That's the sort of exposure we're taking on this channel. And Badu Jack, should really be the unified 168 pound champion, also the Ring Magazine and the lineal champion as well. When he early on this year took on James DeGale from the United Kingdom in a fantastic fight, unification fight. The fight was adjudicated a draw. A highly controversial decision. I thought Badu Jack had won the fight comfortably, 8 rounds to 4. Very, very disillusioned with the decision. James DeGale having suffered facial injuries, requiring facial surgery, also required elbow, shoulder surgery. Those may have been precipitated in instead of earlier bouts. But Badu Jack had inflicted a savage, systematic, slow beatdown, culminating in James finally going down in the 12th round. Badu Jack having come off the canvas in the first round after a beautiful DeGale right hand counter. But Jack had inflicted a beating, almost reminiscent of the way Julio Cesar Chavez had beaten Meldrick Taylor. Meldrick may have been, the visceral, flashier combinations, but Chavez was doing the damaging work, which culminated in the fight being stopped, and Meldrick Taylor regrettably was never the same fighter. And we've seen it with James DeGale as well, in his comeback fight against Caleb Truax after a very long layoff and surgery. He subsequently lost his title. The remnants of the beating he took was still visible. Was reticent to engage, lounging on the back ropes. Almost very similar to the way Adrian Broner's style has become now since Broner's era of so-called invincibility was just shattered by Marcus Maidana. Broner's become a flat-footed fighter operating in the high guard, unwilling to let his hands go, unwilling to engage because he's so afraid of being knocked out. And that was clearly visible in James DeGale's demeanour and body language as well. So I think Badu's Jack may have taken his soul. But I'm going to talk about also one other fighter who may have a strong case of Fighter of the Year. And I guess a lot of it depends on what he does on the 31st, as he's due to compete in a unification bout, so a highly significant fight. Now the fighter is Milan Melendo from the Philippines. A fighter, a lot of people may not be aware about, but Milan Melendo this year has had, two highly significant victories. Both of them, you can argue, have been against the odds. The journey began back in May when Melendo won the IBF World Light Flyweight title. That is 108 pounds. His accomplishments were in Japan when he defeated, the reigning champion and a freeweight champion in Akira Yagashi. Milan, inflicted a savage beatdown. The referee stopping the bout at 2 minutes 45 in round one, having knocked down Yagashi numerous times before the stoppage. People may say, well, who the hell is Akira Yagashi now? Akira is a former WBC World Minimum Weight champion, and he was also a former WBC World Flyweight, and he was also the lineal champion as well, having subsequently lost, the title to the great Roman Chocolatito Gonzalez. So Yagashi was a highly respected fighter at the lower weight categories. And for Melendo to travel from the Philippines to inflict a savage beatdown, certainly took some note. But once again, you can argue, well, did Yagashi just get caught cold? Was that an aberration? Well, from there, Melendo, defended his IBF title when he outpointed South African Heki Butler over in the Philippines. Now, Heki Butler was a former long-standing WBA regular minimum weight champion, and the title was upgraded to a WBA Super after Heki made a number of defenses. Heki was also a long-standing IBO champion, having sort of held the belt simultaneously. A wonderful champion, certainly at at 105 pounds at the minimum weight. Melendo was won the bout by a split decision in a very close fight. A counter argument to that could be that some had felt that Hecky Butler, the better boxer, may have been unfortunate not to have got the decision in the Philippines. But I think most would argue that it was a very, very, very close decision. So you couldn't argue, for maybe a 115, 113 card. I felt the fight could have gone either way. A 115, 113 for Butler, a 115, 130 for Melendo, or even a 114, 114 draw may have been, would have been, a respectable decision and, a rematch to follow. But, Melendo got the decision. You can't argue it's a robbery. Split decision, I think, reflects a very, very close fight. So, you just got to accept that. Now, let's take a little bit of a look at Melendo as a fighter. Now, Melendo, prior to winning the title, had suffered 2 losses. Now, back in 2015, Melendo, when he first challenged for the IBF title, he lost to Javier Mendoza for the light flyweight belt. The fight was stopped after round 6, and it went to the scorecards, and Mendoza got the benefit of the decision. An unfortunate way, for a title fight to be decided, on cuts. So you can't really gauge too much about that. You've still got 6 more rounds, so a fighter can stage a comeback. So, but Mendoza's only other defeat, I think his solitary legitimate loss was back in 2013 in July, when he challenged Juan Francisco Estrada. And that fight took place over in China. Estrada was defending his WBA 112 pound belt. It was a reasonably close fight. Melendo up against I feel one of the best fighters of any weight category. Juan Francisco Estrada, has not had a lot of exposure. Certainly in the US. He was actually involved in one of the best fights I've seen, when he challenged Roman Gonzalez in one just one of the best wars that you'll likely ever see. And Juan Francisco Estrada, we saw this year when he put on a clinique against Carlos Cuadras on the Superfly card on HBO, and he's due to challenge Srisiket Rangvasai for the WBC flyweight belt, super flyweight belt. That fight is going to be scheduled in February as part of the Superfly card, the second installment. So Melendo, put on I think a very admirable performance, surviving the 12 rounds and just being outpointed by Estrada. So in all, a very decent fighter. Somebody that is sadly been overlooked, forgotten, and he could make a very good argument for Fighter of the Year when on the 31st he challenges Ryoichi Taguchi, and that fight is going to be a unification belt. Melendo is putting forward his IBF World Light Flyweight title up against Taguchi, who only has 2 defeats, one of them to Naoya Inoue, one of the great fighters of of the lower weight categories, a 2-weight world champion, you know, a brutal puncher, boxer, who's going to be lighting up audiences in the US, you know, in years to come. A highly intriguing fight. Melendo going on the road once again in Japan. The underdog as well, Taguchi, you know, a tremendous fighter. Really like his pressure, his volume. So if Melendo was to come out as the unified champion, you know, 3 notable scalps this year, 3 upsets, one could argue as well, against 3, you know, highly decorated champions as well. You know, I think it gives him a very, you know, worthy case, you know, as a possible, you know, 2017 fighter of the year. So may have to do a follow-up video after the New Year's cards, you know, has completed, and just to, you know, just to reflect on the bout itself, and you know, may have to reassess my decision. But you know, that was just, you know, just throwing in a couple of names, you know, trying to sort of, you know, decipher, you know, the hidden agendas of some of these networks who are just really promoting, you know, fighters who they have a vested interest in showcasing, and just sort of elucidating the point that, you know, there's so many great fighters out there in so many jurisdictions who, you know, we ignore. You know, Wahang Manayatan of Thailand has, you know, moved on to 49-0 this year. And next year, you know, he could eclipse Floyd Mayweather's record of 50-0. But yeah, you know, Manayatan has remained at one solitary weight division. You know, certainly doesn't have Floyd Mayweather's resume. But it just goes to show, you know, there are a lot of good fighters out there who are doing, you know, doing great things. So yeah. Hope you guys you know, found the video, you know, riveting, you know, interesting, you know, thought-provoking as well. You know, as I said, it's just designed to, you know, just to stimulate some opinion. I'm not trying to annihilate the achievements of Terence Crawford or not. You know, he is fighter of the year. You know, many congratulations to him. You know, certainly a worthy recipient. You know, he's dismantling opponents, you know, the same way that Floyd Mayweather do. And you can't really criticize a guy for not being in exciting fights, because it's more due to the discrepancy in skill set. He's so much better than his opponents, and you can't blame him for that. You know, at 147 pounds, when he's fighting against, you know, much bigger fighters, you know, that's going to be, you know, the real challenge. And, you know, if he can overcome, you know, some of these behemoths at that division, who can also box, who have better punch resistance as well, then, you know, we could be looking at, you know, one of the greats of the last person to unify, to become undisputed, was Costa Zero at 140 pounds. So, but if Crawford goes on to, you know, become an undisputed, or, you know, even a unified at 147 pounds, then, you know, one would certainly put him well above the likes of Kostya Tszyu, without any disagreements. So yeah, 2018 going to be very interesting. So hope you guys enjoyed the video. Let me know in the comments section on any fighters that even I may have overlooked, who, you know, fighters, you know, maybe like an Anthony Joshua, you know, has had certainly one signature victor. You know, I can't forget about him. But, you know, I would argue that, you know, Vladimir Klitschko, you know, was a finished fighter, 42-year-old, been out the ring 2.5 years, coming off a defeat from Tyson Fury. but he really wanted to demonstrate that he was a warrior. And I think in the 5th round, he certainly defied the critics and showed me personally that for what he's been, the scathing criticism that he's received all his career, that he's not exemplified of warrior-like characteristics. He showed me in that 5th round where he went down heavily, but he came back to dominate the round, that up against a a fighter who was a stone heavier, much younger, fresher fighter. Klitschko had been fighting 27 years, and his opponent was 27 years. So Joshua, also had a fantastic win, maybe the most signature, the most definitive win of the year. But personally, I think there's questionable marks against Vladimir Klitschko. But that's just my opinion. Corruption in boxing here. I'm out.